She doesn't panic after betrayal. She performs normality. That's the part nobody tells men. Most husbands think guilt looks dramatic, crying, nervousness, sudden confessions. But real guilt, especially when someone is terrified of losing stability, often becomes quieter, calmer, more controlled. And that's why so many men miss it, because they're looking for chaos while she's focused on managing perception. Now, understand this carefully before we go deeper. This video is not about paranoia. It's not about teaching men to accuse, spy, or destroy relationships based on suspicion. Human behavior is complex, and many signs can come from stress, emotional distance, or unrelated personal struggles. But there are patterns that psychology repeatedly observes when someone is carrying hidden guilt inside a relationship. And the first hidden sign is this: she suddenly becomes unusually careful with emotional reactions. Not colder, not meaner, more controlled. A wife who feels emotionally settled reacts naturally. Some days she's warm, some days she's irritated. Real intimacy has emotional variation. But when hidden guilt enters the picture, many people begin monitoring themselves excessively. Why? Because guilt creates fear of exposure, and fear changes behavior. She starts measuring her responses before giving them. Conversations feel slightly rehearsed. Her expressions arrive a fraction too late, almost as if she checked them internally before showing them externally. You ask a normal question, and her answer sounds polished. Not fake enough to prove anything, just unusually managed. And the reason this unsettles men is because the emotional spontaneity begins disappearing. You stop feeling like you're talking to someone relaxed. You feel like you're talking to someone maintaining balance very carefully. Now, here's where it becomes psychologically important. Guilt consumes mental energy. A person hiding something significant often becomes hyper-aware of tone, timing, and emotional consistency. They fear contradiction. They fear accidental slips. They fear creating suspicion where none existed before. So instead of behaving naturally, they begin behaving strategically. And strategy has a texture. You can feel it even when you can't explain it. This is why some men describe the experience by saying, something feels off, but I can't prove anything. Because the nervous system notices emotional shifts before the conscious mind fully understands them. Now listen carefully, because this part matters. This sign alone proves nothing. Stress can create the same behavior. Anxiety can create the same behavior. Depression, burnout, emotional disconnection, all can affect communication patterns. That's why mature observation matters more than emotional reaction. Weak men search for evidence to confirm fear. Grounded men observe patterns before creating conclusions. And there's another layer most people never discuss. Sometimes guilt doesn't make a person distant. Sometimes it makes them temporarily more attentive. This confuses men deeply. A wife carrying unresolved guilt may suddenly become unusually agreeable, less argumentative, more eager to avoid conflict. Not because the relationship improved naturally, but because internally she feels she has lost moral leverage. Psychologically, guilt often creates compensation behavior. The mind tries to restore balance without directly confronting the truth. So she may overmanage peace inside the relationship while privately carrying emotional tension underneath it. And if you're emotionally intelligent, you'll notice a contradiction. The actions appear calmer, but the energy feels heavier. That contradiction matters. Because authentic connection feels relaxed, performance feels careful. Now let me tell you the dangerous mistake many men make at this stage. They become investigators instead of observers. They obsess, interrogate, search constantly for certainty. And in doing so, they destroy their own emotional stability before discovering any actual truth. You cannot build clarity from panic. You build clarity from patience, pattern recognition, and emotional control. Because whether your suspicion is right or wrong, losing control of yourself will damage you either way. That's the real lesson here. Not how to catch someone, how to remain psychologically grounded when uncertainty enters your life. And trust me, most people fail that test long before the relationship itself fails, because betrayal doesn't only reveal character in the person hiding something, it reveals character in the person responding to suspicion. And sometimes the first thing a man must confront is not her behavior, but the fear inside himself that he's been ignoring for years. The second hidden sign is not what she hides from you, it's what she suddenly protects from you. And there's a difference. Privacy is normal. Every healthy person deserves emotional space, independent thoughts, personal routines. Mature relationships understand that. But when guilt enters the mind, protection behaviors often become sharper, faster, more emotionally charged. Not because she wants privacy, because she fears discovery. And fear changes the nervous system. A wife carrying hidden guilt may start reacting differently to ordinary interruptions. You walk into a room unexpectedly and her body stiffens for half a second before relaxing. You ask who she was texting and the answer comes too quickly or too defensively. Again, not dramatic enough to prove anything, just emotionally disproportionate. That's the key. The reaction feels larger than the situation required. Psychology calls this anticipatory defense. When someone is mentally protecting hidden emotional territory, even neutral moments can feel threatening to them internally. So the body prepares before the mind fully catches up. And you'll notice it most in small, everyday interactions. She angles her phone away without thinking, minimizes screens quickly, becomes unusually aware of notifications, suddenly values alone time in ways that feel emotionally disconnected instead of restorative. Now listen carefully. None of these signs alone confirm betrayal. A stressed person can become protective. Someone overwhelmed emotionally can withdraw. A person struggling privately may seek more isolation for completely innocent reasons. This is why emotionally mature men focus on clusters of behavior, not isolated incidents. One moment means little. Patterns tell stories. And here's the pattern many men describe before discovering hidden guilt. The relationship begins feeling emotionally less transparent, even while appearing functional on the surface. Conversations lose depth, presence loses warmth. Eye contact shortens during meaningful moments, but remains normal during routine interactions. It's almost like she's still physically inside the relationship, but psychologically managing distance. That's what unsettles people the most, not conflict. Distance without explanation, because confusion creates obsession. The human brain hates incomplete emotional information. When behavior changes without clarity, the mind starts searching desperately for certainty. And this is where many men destroy themselves emotionally. They stop living normally. Every delayed reply becomes suspicious. Every schedule change becomes a theory. Every emotional shift becomes evidence. That is not awareness. That is fear consuming perception. A strong man does not ignore red flags, but he also does not surrender his identity to anxiety. He stays observant without becoming paranoid. That balance matters more than most men realize. Now, let's go deeper into something uncomfortable. Hidden guilt often changes how affection feels. Not necessarily less affection. Different affection. Sometimes it becomes mechanical, timed, overcalculated. Almost as if she's trying to maintain relationship equilibrium consciously instead of naturally. And the reason is psychologically fascinating. When guilt exists, affection can stop being purely emotional and start becoming regulatory. In simple terms, she may use normal relationship behaviors to reassure herself that things are still stable. Again, this is not always manipulation. Human beings often do this unconsciously. People want emotional balance, even when they helped create the imbalance themselves. Now, here's the detail that quietly breaks many men once they notice it. The energy changes most during unplanned moments. Spontaneous connection becomes weaker. Unexpected intimacy feels less fluid. Why? Because rehearsed behavior is easier to control than authentic presence, and hidden guilt requires control. That's why casual, unscripted moments often reveal more truth than serious conversations do. A person can prepare answers. It's harder to prepare instincts. But let me ground you again before your mind runs too far. Suspicion alone is not wisdom, and emotional pain does not automatically make your assumptions accurate. Some men secretly want confirmation because certainty feels easier than ambiguity. At least betrayal gives the pain a name. But emotionally mature people understand something difficult. Not every relationship problem is betrayal. Sometimes the distance comes from unresolved resentment, emotional burnout, identity struggles, depression, loss of attraction, or years of silent disconnection nobody addressed honestly. That's why calm observation matters, because panic blinds perception. And the truth, whatever it is, reveals itself much faster to the man who stays emotionally centered than to the man who loses himself chasing certainty. The strongest position you can ever stand in is this: aware but not consumed. Because the moment fear controls your behavior, you stop seeing clearly. And once that happens, even innocent silence starts sounding like guilt inside your own mind. The third hidden sign is one most men misunderstand completely, because on the surface it can look positive. She suddenly becomes deeply invested in controlling how the relationship appears, not necessarily improving it, managing its image. And those are not the same thing. A wife carrying hidden guilt often becomes highly aware of perception, what others think, how the relationship looks publicly, whether routines appear normal, whether emotional distance becomes noticeable, because guilt creates a psychological split between reality and presentation. And maintaining that split takes effort. Now pay attention to this carefully. Healthy couples naturally care about their image sometimes. That's normal. But when guilt is involved, the concern becomes emotionally loaded. Small things start mattering too much. Photos, social appearances, family gatherings, public affection, social media activity, conversations about the relationship in front of others. It's almost like she's unconsciously trying to reinforce the idea of stability, both for other people and for herself. Because if everything looks intact, she temporarily feels safer internally. This is one of the strangest parts of human psychology. People often try hardest to preserve appearances when they feel something slipping privately, and men sense this shift intuitively. You start noticing moments where the relationship feels strangely polished in public, but emotionally disconnected in private. That contradiction becomes difficult to ignore. Now let's go deeper into something most people never discuss openly. Guilt changes memory behavior. A person carrying emotional conflict often becomes inconsistent with details, not necessarily because they're lying constantly, but because maintaining separate emotional realities creates mental strain. So you may notice small contradictions, stories slightly changing, timelines becoming blurry, explanations feeling incomplete. Again, none of this alone proves betrayal. Stress affects memory too. Emotional overload affects consistency too. That's why mature men avoid emotional courtrooms built on fragments. But patterns matter, especially when the emotional energy surrounding those inconsistencies feels tense instead of natural. Here's another hidden shift many men notice too late. She becomes unusually sensitive to indirect topics about loyalty, trust, or cheating, even when the conversation isn't about her. This is psychologically important. Why? Because unresolved guilt increases emotional reactivity around related themes, a random movie scene, a celebrity scandal, a friend's relationship problem. Topics that once passed casually now create subtle discomfort, irritation, or abrupt disengagement, not always consciously. The nervous system reacts before logic organizes the response, and sometimes the strongest clue is not anger, it's avoidance. A quick subject change, a dismissive laugh, an emotional shutdown that arrives too fast. Because certain conversations suddenly feel dangerous internally, even when no accusation exists externally. Now here comes the part that separates emotionally reactive men from emotionally intelligent ones. An insecure man hears this information and starts hunting for proof everywhere. A grounded man hears this information and starts paying closer attention to overall relationship reality. Because the deeper issue is rarely the individual sign. It's the emotional pattern underneath all the signs combined. Does the relationship still feel emotionally honest? Does communication still feel relaxed and open? Does affection still carry presence instead of obligation? Does conflict still lead toward understanding or only toward avoidance? Those questions matter far more than detective behavior ever will. And let me tell you something difficult most men eventually learn the hard way. The human mind can become addicted to suspicion. Not because suspicion feels good, but because uncertainty feels unbearable. So the brain keeps searching, analyzing, replaying, obsessing over tiny details in an attempt to regain emotional control. But constant suspicion changes a man. It drains confidence, destroys peace, weakens judgment. And eventually, even if no betrayal exists, the relationship begins collapsing under the weight of distrust itself. That's why emotional discipline matters so much here. You must be strong enough to notice patterns without becoming consumed by them. Because once obsession enters the picture, you stop seeing reality clearly. You begin seeing fear reflected back at you everywhere. And ironically, that fear often pushes relationships further into emotional distance. Now remember this carefully. The goal is not to become suspicious of women. The goal is to become emotionally aware as a man, aware enough to notice when energy changes, aware enough to confront issues calmly instead of emotionally exploding, aware enough to handle truth with dignity if it arrives. Because in the end, your greatest power is not controlling another person's behavior. It's controlling who you become when trust feels uncertain. The final hidden sign is the one that hurts men the most because it forces them to confront something deeper than betrayal. It forces them to confront emotional disconnection that may have existed long before any mistake was ever made. The sign is this: she stops fighting for emotional understanding, but continues maintaining the relationship mechanically. And that difference changes everything. A woman who is emotionally invested even during conflict still wants to be understood. She argues, explains, reacts, pushes for resolution. There is emotional energy inside the relationship, even if it's messy sometimes. But when hidden guilt or deep emotional withdrawal takes hold, many people stop trying to emotionally repair things. Instead, they manage logistics. Schedules continue. Responsibilities continue. Conversations happen. Life moves forward. But something essential quietly disappears: emotional presence. And men feel this before they can explain it. You sit beside her, but something feels absent, not physically, psychologically. The warmth becomes thinner, the curiosity fades, the emotional spontaneity weakens. Interactions begin feeling functional instead of connected. And this is where many men finally panic, because deep down they realize something terrifying. You can share a house with someone who is no longer fully emotionally inside the relationship. Now let's be very clear. This does not automatically mean cheating. Many relationships drift emotionally over time without betrayal ever occurring. Stress changes people. Parenthood changes people. Routine changes people. Unspoken resentment changes people. Life itself can slowly erode emotional intimacy if nobody actively protects it. But when guilt exists alongside emotional withdrawal, the disconnect often carries a specific emotional texture: avoidance, not hatred, not constant conflict. Avoidance. Difficult conversations get delayed. Emotional honesty becomes shallow. Real connection gets replaced with maintenance behavior, because maintaining appearances feels safer than confronting uncomfortable truth. Now, here's the heartbreaking part. Most men never say out loud. Sometimes they sense the emotional shift long before they admitted it to themselves, but they ignored it. Not because they were weak, because acceptance felt dangerous. The human mind protects stability at all costs. If your entire emotional world is built around a relationship, your brain naturally resists information that threatens it. So men rationalize: she's just stressed. She's tired lately. It's probably nothing. And sometimes they're absolutely right, but sometimes intuition was trying to speak long before logic caught up. Now listen carefully to what I'm about to say next, because this matters more than every sign in this entire video. Your goal should never be becoming obsessed with catching betrayal. Your goal should be becoming the kind of man who can face truth without collapsing, because no relationship, no matter how beautiful, is guaranteed permanent certainty. That's adulthood. That's reality. Trust is always an act of courage. And emotional maturity means accepting that love without emotional risk does not exist. Now, does that mean becoming cold, suspicious, emotionally closed off? No. It means becoming emotionally stable enough that another person's choices do not destroy your identity. That's real strength. And ironically, men who develop that strength usually create healthier relationships in the first place, because they stop operating from desperation. They stop begging for reassurance every time anxiety appears. They stop confusing control with security, and they start focusing on something much more powerful: clarity, calm communication, self-respect, emotional awareness. Those qualities matter far more than detective instincts ever will. So if something feels wrong in your relationship, don't respond with panic. Respond with presence. Observe calmly. Communicate honestly. Watch patterns instead of isolated moments. And most importantly, do not abandon yourself emotionally while trying to understand someone else. Because sometimes the greatest damage in uncertain relationships isn't what another person did. It's how much of yourself you lost while searching for answers. So here's the question I want you to answer honestly in the comments. What hurts more for a man: discovering betrayal, or realizing the emotional connection disappeared long before the truth ever surfaced? If this video made you think differently about trust, relationships, and emotional awareness, then like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with a man who needs clarity instead of panic.